Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time of day it is, wherever you are. Please excuse the very noisy van behind me. Welcome to today's Grain Market Blast. It is Tuesday, the 17th of June, all day. And as usual, you join me and the wonderful, with a capital W, Angie Setzer, where Angie will be providing a rapid roundup of the latest pricing, flows and market moving news in agricultural markets. Hello, Angie.
Hello. Did you do the legals?
Oh, good point. No, I haven't.
Okay. I'm not allowed to talk until the legals are
Right.
over. You have me
Okay.
trained very well, I just
I
like to
do.
say.
I was testing you. That's all I was doing. I was testing you.
I
So as
win.
usual, yeah, exactly. As usual, nothing discussed in this space of session constitutes trading or investment advice or infers any kind of endorsement by PIQ, myself, Ryan Paisley, or indeed the wonderful Angie Setzer.
Woohoo! Good job.
Woo.
Your work here is done. So
See you
happy,
later.
early Tuesday morning for everyone. We're about 15 minutes early today, which is totally
My fault.
cool.
My fault.
No, not, it's fault is not the right word. Let's be honest here. So welcome to the Thunderdome, 15 minutes, ahead of schedule. We like it. And I honestly am just kind of sitting here like, where do you even start? Just
Yeah.
simply because there's a lot going on, but at the same time, there's not a lot going on. Like that feels like, basically the best way I'd put it is like we have our foot mashed down on the accelerator, but also on the brake. So we're just, like revving it up and going nowhere. But, geopolitical stuff seems to be the biggest focus, right? We've kind of got this, what is going to happen with the Iran situation. We're watching, what, the U.S. is going to do or what, we're going to have, basically they've kind of offered like, hey, we're here. We are willing to last ditch effort. It feels like to have this negotiation, work out this deal. If not, then, there's talk, at least at this point, that the U.S. could join in, on the conflict, which I think I shouldn't say everyone, a good majority of folks out there are kind of like, please no, let's not, and say we did. Like my parents used to say that to me anytime. I'd be like, hey, can
Yeah.
we do
No,
this
exactly
one
that.
thing? And they'd
That's
want
definitely the
to.
vibe.
You're like,
That is definitely the
yeah,
vibe.
let's not and say we did in a big way on this, but, that's really kind of where we're at is, what happens next there could have some major implications on really what happens around the world. In addition, I think, kind of the one thing that I'm watching the most when it comes to Iran and Israel outside of the obvious is how it influences the situation between Russia and Ukraine. We heard this morning, right, that the U.S. has basically kind of disbanded this group that was put together to kind of put pressure on Russia to come and do the peace talk things. We've also heard, that Trump is just not in a big hurry. He just doesn't feel it necessary, to increase sanctions. And so while everyone's kind of paying attention to what's going on between Iran and Israel, you have Russia launching their longest attack on Kyiv overnight, 9 hours long, killed 15 people, launched almost 500 drones. Like we're kind of forgetting. And the reason I point this out is this is going to start to have major implications on Ukraine's ability to ship grain, to transport grain, to move grain. Not only are you seeing Russia really kind of further push, into the eastern portions, there's talk that there's like 50,000, troops amassed, I think, along the Sumy border right there, getting ready to kind of make another push. You have more in the way of attacks, drone attacks, mines and things like that, happening in Western Ukraine where you didn't have that happen before. So, everyone's kind of downplaying the impact of the war, of the situation on Ukrainian grain production and exports, because for the most part, since the invasion happened, a lot of folks have kind of rallied around Ukraine, rallied around the situation in general and been like, hey, this is off limits. These sort of things can't happen. This is what we want to make sure isn't taking place, kind of protecting agriculture. And that's not happening anymore. And so obviously the risk, I think, of Russia, Russia getting big sanctions that would impact their ability to export grain, I think is super low at this point. That doesn't appear to be anything that the administration is even considering. Even if the EU wanted to try to push it, you're not going to see it really happen. So that part is low. But what do we do if we start to see some continued, reductions in production out of Ukraine and continued reductions in their ability to export? It leaves a bit of a hole in the world market or the global pipeline. And also, when it comes down to it, this is one of those things that we're not really discussing, in the global corn situation, like we're focusing on Brazil, US, Argentina. Well, Ukraine is an exporter of, 500 million to 750 million bushels of corn a year. This matters, especially as you see the EU kind of drying out and heating up and some of these other things. And so the geopolitical situation that we have, obviously we're watching, the main focus has become Iran and Israel. Looks like the US has kind of laid down sort of this ultimatum, if you will, like, hey, come sit down. We need to negotiate. Trump said though that, he's not going for a ceasefire anymore. He wants to completely end this. And that means taking the
Yeah,
nuclear weapons away.
just on
Yeah,
this,
go ahead.
I just saw whilst I was listening to you, I just saw Bloomberg put out a piece. I believe it was a quote from Donald Trump saying that along the lines of, I'm trying to memorise it because it just scrolled past my phone. Along the lines of the time is near, the end of the regime is upon us, kind of thing.
Yeah,
So
so that's
it seems
cool.
like
We've
we've gone
always
from ceasefire isn't kind of the intention at the moment.
I just want to scream a little bit because we've always had, it's great success with regime changes by military force in the
Oh
Middle
yes,
East.
oh
It's
yeah,
our track record is
absolutely.
impeccable. So I can see why we would really want to push forward with this. Anyway, I'm just gonna go sit in the corner and scream
Also,
for a minute. Yeah.
I'm not sure if you've noticed, but I did see this morning. Funny enough, we posted it. PIQ posted it. I believe it was an exclusive from Reuters, saying that. Sorry, I think a train's about to go past me, so apologies for the noise. It's basically saying that quietly Trump has disbanded the.
Yes, I said that. Yeah,
Um,
about the
a,
Russia
a,
thing. Yeah, yeah. The group, due to a lack of presidential interest or a waning of presidential
that's the
interest.
one.
Yeah, yeah. So that's, and so there's just, your Ukraine-Russia situation is going to get worse. And even worse now is that you have, a secondary situation that's likely to inflame everything that's going on. And so, yeah, we'll see how that all, plays out. But the geopolitics, will have a huge influence on all kinds of different things. But, the butterfly effect is going to be real in this one, where it's just, you may not think it really matters directly, but it has an influence, 5 steps down the line. So we'll be watching that really
Yeah,
close. That's
exactly
one of
that.
the biggest things we're paying attention to. Kind of like in relation to that, we have the trade conversation because Trump did leave the G7 summit early, because of the situation in Iran and Israel, though he did say that, Macron, I always say it wrong. I put the wrong emphasis on the wrong syllable.
Macaroni.
Yeah, whatever his name is over there, the French fry guy. He is, the head of France. Sorry if I'm disrespecting you, but anyway, Trump is saying like, he didn't say, right, he's aiming for a ceasefire or whatever. That's why Trump left. Trump's like, that's not what I'm doing. He's wrong again. So obviously that went well. But Trump did leave the G7 early, aiming for probably this high level sort of nuclear conversation and, to
But
weigh the decision.
but
Yes. Yes, sir.
but the UK did get a trade
They
deal. Apparently,
did.
we got.
Yes. We're going to start doing
Although
that. Yeah.
when Trump did drop it all on the floor and Starmer picked it up, President Trump did say this is a great trade deal with the EU, and it had to be Starmer that corrected him and say, "Hang on a second, hang on,
We
wait,
voted on that
this
in
is the UK. We
2016.
voted out, we voted out."
Like, that's it. This is 9 years old. We broke up a while ago, guy. Yeah, so the UK did get one, but Japan and the US were supposed to announce their big deal. They did not. Apparently Japan's prime minister, and President Trump met, or had a conversation. Maybe they exchanged notes on the side or whatever, that they're going to continue talking, but the idea that we were going to see this big trade announcement.
Yeah,
Everyone had kind of led up. The G7 was going to be the big deal. Didn't happen. So that's one of those things where you're like, oh, okay. But
yeah.
then you also have, Canada and
I think they're
Mexico.
stuck on auto tariffs, I believe, right?
Yes, yeah,
Yeah.
Japan doesn't want any auto tariffs, and the US wants Japan to import its rice, which, the Japan's like, no way, Jose, we're not gonna do that. We can't do that. But then they also have domestic
Well,
rice
I,
prices at the
the
highest in
Well,
forever.
it's exactly what I was about to say. I was about to say exactly that. There's, a story that's not really been picked up much is that Japan have a severe crisis underway in their own domestic rice.
Yes,
So,
yeah, stockpiles. They've already lost
potentially.
their ag minister because he hadn't ever had to buy rice. He didn't have to
Oh,
buy
that was
rice
it.
because
Yeah,
everyone gave it to him. I was like, oh guy, yeah, you shouldn't say that. But anyway, yeah, so the Japan thing, really didn't kind of pan out. One thing of interest though that I thought was, just a kind of, nice nice sign potentially, because everyone likes to point out the negative things, in trade between the U.S. and China. We did see China approve like 106 poultry and processing plants on Friday. Coincidentally, they hadn't approved them since like the beginning of April. It was one of those things that everyone had kind of pointed out as a really negative relation sign. And so they approved like 106 of them on Friday, is probably a decent signer. On the other trade side thing though, we were supposed to see Sheinbaum, Carney, and Trump get together, at the G7 summit. Sorry, got a phone call. We were supposed to see Carney, Sheinbaum, and Trump get together at the G7 summit, and have a discussion about, refreshing the USMCA deal. Did not see any news on that happening either. So apparently, which, to be fair, like we did have sort of a situation break out that we weren't anticipating that does take priority over these trade deals. Though it'll be a question, on how this all kind of develops as we move forward. We'll be watching to see. We did see, Vietnam and, there was another one, Taiwan, I think it was, come in and say that they would buy more grain products. We've already talked about Vietnam. We did see Unknown come in and buy a big chunk of soybean meal this morning. So that was supportive. And yeah, I mean, we'll see on the trade side where that develops, but there's a bunch of disappointing folks out there, disappointed folks and disappointing folks, honestly. Get your shit together.
Yeah, let's be honest.
Yes, what are you doing? But disappointed folks that, we thought we'd see something and we didn't. Watching going forward, weather-wise, obviously, just weather looks decent. We got a lot of rain. One of the things that's interesting though is like, what is good for the corn crop right now, which is heat and moisture. We're really kind of struggling. We've got about 6 million acres of soybeans that are left unplanted. And so that's interesting to me, especially when we have a 295 million bushel carryout projected currently from the USDA. Yeah, you can argue that exports are overstated if you want to. That's fine. Have at it. You could also argue that crush is probably understated now with the RVO announcement that we had late last week. And so let's swap them out at this point in time if you want to. But we're also projecting a record yield on, the acres that are out there. And the forecast right now continues to call for pretty heavy moisture. And so if you're a farmer who's looking at 1063 futures, $10 maybe cash for harvest delivery, maybe 10 and a quarter if you're a lucky fella or something like that, you might be thinking twice about putting the soybeans in the ground, though crop insurance really isn't sexy either. So I'm not going to sit here and argue that it's like a no-brainer, but, nothing is like mudding stuff in, and really trying to force it at this point when prices are low and cash is tight and everyone is depressed as all get out on the farm side of things. Like just something to take into consideration, something to pay attention to from an overall standpoint. And soybeans do not like wet feet. Young soybean plants tend to struggle a lot. If you have excessive moisture and warm temperatures, they get a lot more in the way of disease. They just tend to die off. Like soybeans are kind of a diva. You have wheat that can survive in any condition, and then you have soybeans. And so it'll be one of those things that we'll be paying attention to. And what is interesting to me is that the one thing that is never discussed currently, or very rarely discussed currently in this market is that the soybean carryout is projected really, really tight, this far out with a record yield. Everyone wants to say that demand is probably overstated, but that, at the same time, you could argue so is production, by a big amount. And so I don't know why we're ignoring, this really tight projected carryout. But I guess that's just another sign of crap sentiment. So we'll see how today plays out. We'll watch to see any geopolitical headlines. That's going to be the biggest thing, the biggest, focus that we have. What happens with Iran? Does the U.S. join in? I'm voting no on that. Hopefully that we do not, and that we can, cooler heads will prevail or whatever. But that's going to be the biggest focus overall today. Everything else is going to take a back seat, and, we'll see what all, develops.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Angie. As usual, you're an absolute star. Listeners, thank you so much for tuning in. I appreciate it's 15 minutes early, so I apologize to everyone that's just joining now. But that's why they're recording while you can play them back, I guess.
Right.
But anyway, whatever you're doing today, stay safe, keep it tight, and we will see you all tomorrow. Much love.
You have a good one, guys.